turning the bridge into a floating ghost road. The bodies we'd seen upstream were gone, swept off. The river smelled of copper that night. Not blood, not yet, but the heavy metallic scent that always seemed to rise from the muddy banks when the jungle heat began to fall. My name is Corporal Isaiah Coleman, 3rd Army Engineer Battalion. Korean War, summer of 1951. I built bridges and blew them up again when command told us to. And that night, I was ordered to save a bridge that didn't want to be saved. I was one of only 3 black men in the whole company. Most days I felt it before I even saw it, the sideways looks, the quiet jokes when they thought I couldn't hear. But you learn to carry it the same way you carry your pack. Heavy, but not worth putting down. Because if you set it down, someone's bound to trip over it. We were tasked with reinforcing the Hantan River crossing, a steel girder bridge that had already been shelled twice by Chinese artillery. If it fell, our supply convoys would be stranded on the wrong side of the valley. Command said it had to hold for 48 hours, no matter what. After that, reinforcements and pontoon replacements would arrive. Our squad was 12 men. Sergeant Frank Doyle, the kind of white sergeant who believed every man should prove himself twice, and me, he figured, should prove it 3 times. Specialist Rodriguez, smart-mouthed but reliable. A wiry demolitions kid named Kenny Price, who hadn't learned yet that a nervous laugh can get you killed. And the rest, mostly farm boys, not much older than 19, shivering in their helmets, even in the muggy dark. We reached the bridge at dusk. The air hummed with mosquitoes and the distant thump of artillery. The Hantan River itself slid past below us, broad, black and slow, reflecting a dying orange glow from the sky. Every creak of the bridge under our boots sounded like a gunshot. Half the decking planks were splintered, one girder sagged, warped by an earlier blast. Doyle barked for us to spread out, secure the far bank, lay fresh sandbags, check the charges. We worked by lantern light, the beams cutting narrow tunnels through the dark like we were mining our way through night itself. While we worked, Kenny said, half joking, "Feels like the river's watching us." No one laughed. Somewhere upriver, we heard a splash, heavy, deliberate, then silence again except for the water dragging itself past the pilings. I kept my head down, hammering spikes into a brace plate, but I felt the same thing Kenny did. Not fear, not yet, but that crawling prickle between your shoulders that says the jungle's awake and you've been noticed. Just after midnight, the moon broke free of a cloud bank, silvering the water enough for us to see bodies, at first just shapes, floating near the upriver bend. At least 3, maybe more, drifting slow, caught on an eddy before the bridge. Faces down, uniforms we couldn't make out. Kenny cursed under his breath. Doyle ordered us not to fire, no reason to give away our position, but he sent 2 men to drag one of the bodies close with a hooked pole. When they rolled it over, the lantern light caught the insignia, Republic of Korea Infantry, friendly. Throats cut clean. They hadn't drowned. The river had brought us a warning, but it kept the rest of its secrets. For now. By dawn, a thin mist crawled over the water, turning the bridge into a floating ghost road. The bodies we'd seen upstream were gone, swept off by the current or pulled under during the night, but the image stayed with us, heavy in the eyes of every man. Sergeant Doyle gathered us on the near bank. "Listen up," he said. "Command says enemy scouts were sighted 3 clicks upriver. They'll want this bridge bad. That means we hold it. We finish the sandbags, reinforce the eastern girder, and we don't blink if the shooting starts." His eyes passed over me and lingered a fraction longer than on anyone else, as if the river wasn't the only thing he didn't quite trust. I'd gotten used to that look, half challenge, half dare, like I had to prove I deserved the same steel helmet they wore. Kenny Price muttered low near me, "Ain't right, man. We all wear the same uniform." I shrugged it off. "Bridge doesn't care what color I am," I said. But I felt that slow burn in my chest, the one you don't let show because you still have to work shoulder to shoulder with these men. We went back to work. The hammer strikes on the decking echoed like muffled gunfire. Rodriguez joked now and then, trying to keep the air light, but even his wisecracks fell flat against the weight of the river and the mist. By midday, the sun burned through the fog, making the steel of the bridge too hot to touch without gloves. Sweat soaked our collars and ran down our spines. We took turns hydrating and checking ammo, just in case. It was during one of those water breaks that Private Lutz came running from the tree line, breathless. "Sarge, movement upriver, boats, can't tell how many." We scrambled into position. The far bank was quiet, only the reeds swaying in a breeze none of us could feel. Then I heard it too, oars dipping in water, soft but steady. A rhythm like a heartbeat. Doyle signaled for us to hold fire. "Could be locals," he whispered, but every man's rifle came up, including mine. The sound grew clearer. Then shadows began to glide out of the morning haze. Low wooden boats, flat and narrow, maybe 6 of them. Through my binoculars, I saw dark helmets, rifles resting on the gunnels. Not locals, not friendly. A small advance force, maybe 20 men, moving quiet, confident, like they expected no trouble. "Coleman," Doyle said without looking at me. "You're on the M1919. If they hit the pilings, you cut 'em down." I crouched behind the mounted gun, sighted downriver, and waited. The boats kept coming, still unaware we'd spotted them, and that's when it happened. A single rifle shot cracked from our side. Too soon, too high-strung. Someone panicked. The round splintered a piling, ricocheted harmlessly into the river. The enemy boats flinched as one. Then the shouting started. Return fire ripped across the water. Bullets sparked against the steel girders and chewed up the sandbags. The river, so quiet minutes ago, came alive with chaos. Spray, splashes, shouts in 2 languages, the stutter of our M1s. I squeezed the trigger of the Browning and felt the gun come alive, kicking against my shoulder as brass casings clattered hot against my arm. I saw one of the boats jerk sideways as its bowman slumped forward, another pitch overboard in a splash that turned red in seconds. "Hold 'em off!" Doyle bellowed. Rodriguez cursed as a round grazed his helmet. Kenny Price laughed nervously again. He always did that under fire, and Doyle snapped at him to shut it. The first wave never reached the bridge. We left 3 boats drifting empty, riddled and spinning in the current. The rest broke off and paddled hard back upriver, vanishing into the bend. When the shooting stopped, I realized I was still holding the trigger down on an empty belt, the barrel smoking. Kenny handed me a canteen without a word. I drank deep, tasting sweat and cordite on my lips. Doyle walked past me, clapped Rodriguez on the shoulder for a good shot, but didn't say a word to me. Like my part didn't count. I let it slide. The river had gone still again, but we all knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That evening, the jungle went quiet long before the sun disappeared. If you've been in combat long enough, you know that silence isn't peace. It's a warning. We doubled the guard. Kenny Price volunteered for first watch, still jittery after the boat fight. I took second shift, knowing I wouldn't sleep anyway. The mist came back as the temperature dropped, thick and wet like wool on our faces. Rodriguez sat beside me with his rifle balanced across his knees. "Coleman," he said in a low voice, "you ever feel like the river's waiting on us? Like it's patient?" I almost laughed, but the sound didn't come. "I think it already picked us out," I said, "just waiting to see how we go down." He nodded slowly, then after a pause added, "Doyle's a hard man, but he's a good sergeant." I didn't answer. Somewhere in my gut I wanted to believe that. But the way Doyle's praise skipped over me earlier, it stuck. Close to midnight we heard movement upriver again, different from the boats. A faint crunch of gravel and reeds shifting near the far bank. Kenny whispered, "Sarge, we've got something." East piling. Doyle joined us, peering into the mist, one hand on the strap of his Thompson. "Hold fire till we know," he ordered. I could feel his breath quicken next to me. Shapes began to form out of the fog. 3 figures, low and fast, hugging the shadows near the far side sandbags. Saboteurs. No doubt about it. I swung the Browning toward them, finger resting on the trigger. "Orders, Sarge," I whispered. For a second he hesitated. Too long. One of the figures crouched by the eastern girder, fumbling with something that glinted in the lantern light. Probably a charge. I didn't wait for Doyle. I squeezed the trigger. The Browning roared, brass flying. One figure dropped instantly, another dove into the river, and the third scrambled back into the tree line. Doyle cursed but didn't stop me. "Rodriguez, Price, check that girder," he barked. They went, crouching low, and came back carrying a small canvas satchel rigged with wires. A satchel charge, meant to take out the whole span. If I'd waited one more heartbeat, it would have been too late. Doyle grunted. Good shooting, Coleman. First time he'd said it all night. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cool that slow burn in my chest. We didn't get a chance to rest. An hour later, we heard more splashing, this time downstream. Rodriguez said, "They're testing us, looking for a weak spot." We shifted positions, kept our rifles trained on the black water. The moon kept ducking behind clouds, giving us only flashes of silver on the river. Every time it came back, I half expected to see those bodies again, drifting silent and still. Around 2 in the morning, the jungle came alive with gunfire. Our listening post on the far bank was under attack. The radio crackled with panicked shouting. "Enemy in the trees. Too many. Request support." Doyle cursed and sent Rodriguez and 2 others across the bridge to reinforce them. I stayed on the Browning, scanning the river for boats. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then it happened again. The river's surface rippled in unnatural patterns. Dark shapes, more boats, emerging from the bend, this time under cover of the firefight on the far side. They were smarter now, splitting our attention. I shouted, "Boats incoming!" and opened up, the muzzle flash strobing in the mist. The others joined in, the bridge itself shaking under the combined fire. Through the chaos, I saw Doyle hauling one of the wounded from the far bank, dragging him backward across the decking while bullets sparked off the steel around them. When the shooting finally slowed, we counted 2 dead enemies tangled against the pilings, and at least 1 boat drifting away unmanned. We'd held again, but barely. And in that brief lull, as Rodriguez checked the satchel charge we'd disarmed earlier, I noticed something upstream, a thin red streak leaking from the reeds into the current. The river, at last, had taken its first blood for the night. We barely had time to catch our breath. The jungle went still again, the kind of stillness that made every man flinch at his own heartbeat. I checked the Browning's barrel, hot enough to sizzle if you spat on it. Rodriguez came back from the far bank with blood on his sleeve, not his own. "They're regrouping," he muttered. "You can feel it." Doyle was kneeling beside the wounded man he'd dragged across the bridge. Price. The kid had a graze on his thigh, nothing fatal, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Easy, son," Doyle told him, voice rough but softer than I'd ever heard it. For the first time that night, I saw the man behind the stripes. He wasn't fearless. He was just carrying the weight so we didn't have to. We reset positions, sandbags shifting under our boots, each of us facing a different angle into the mist. I couldn't shake the image of that thin red streak I'd seen upstream. Somewhere in the reeds, the river was still pulling at the bodies it had claimed. Rodriguez broke the silence. "You think we'll make it till dawn, Coleman?" I wanted to give him the easy answer. Sure, but instead I told the truth. "We'll make it as long as we keep firing." A faint thump carried over the water, low and heavy, like someone beating a drum under the surface. Kenny stiffened. "That ain't thunder." It wasn't. Another thump followed. Mortars. They were setting up tubes somewhere in the tree line across the bend. "Eyes up," Doyle ordered. "When those rounds start falling, we spread out. Don't bunch on the bridge." The first shell hit short, landing in the mud on the east bank with a spray of dirt and water. The second landed closer, rocking the decking beneath our boots. By the third, we were all crouched low, rifles pressed to shoulders, ears ringing. I swung the Browning toward the source of the flashes. For a split second between clouds of mist, I spotted the mortar crew silhouetted against a lantern glow. "Got 'em!" I shouted. Rodriguez dropped beside me with his Garand, adding his shots to my burst. The tracers stitched across the river, cutting down 2 of the crew. The third tried to run but stumbled into the reeds and vanished. We thought we'd bought a moment of relief. We were wrong. From the opposite bank, a line of muzzle flashes erupted, enemy rifles firing in controlled bursts. They were covering another wave of boats sliding silently out of the dark, 5 of them this time, low and narrow, each packed with men. "Light 'em up!" Doyle roared. The night turned into thunder again, our Browning hammering, Garand snapping, grenades hissing as they hit the water. One of the boats flipped when a grenade found it, men spilling into the river with screams cut short by the current. Another boat got as far as the pilings before Rodriguez shot the man in the bow, and the whole thing drifted sideways into the wreck of the first. I lost count of how many I fired. The Browning's barrel glowed dull orange, the smell of hot oil and cordite thick in the air. Through it all, I noticed Doyle moving from man to man, not barking anymore, just shouting directions. Sharp, clear, steady, even when a round punched through his sleeve and left a burning graze on his arm. He didn't flinch. When the firing finally tapered off, all we heard was the hiss of steam rising from the Browning and the river lapping at the pilings. Price lay back against a sandbag, pale but alive. Rodriguez gave a grim nod in my direction. "That was you again, Coleman. You stopped him from getting close." Doyle didn't argue. He just looked at me for a long second and said, "Keep that gun ready. We're not out of this yet." I caught something in his eyes then. Reluctant respect. A quiet acknowledgement that maybe the color of my skin wasn't the first thing he saw anymore. The jungle stayed quiet the rest of the hour, but none of us believed it was over. The river still moved beneath us, slow and black, carrying pieces of the night downstream. And I couldn't help thinking that the worst wasn't the gunfire or the mortars. The worst was knowing dawn might come too late. Morning didn't arrive so much as seep in, thin light smearing across the water until the fog turned the color of old steel. We were still on the bridge, filthy and wired, every nerve listening for what the river might do next. The birds had the nerve to start singing. It felt like an insult. Price dozed upright with his bandage snugged tight. Rodriguez checked the Browning's headspace and timing like a priest straightening candles after an all-night vigil. Preacher coaxed the radio until it stopped sulking and gave us something better than static, a promise of a resupply run when the ceiling lifted. Sergeant Doyle stood at the midpoint with his helmet off and his jaw set, eyes on the far bank. He looked like a statue cut from fatigue and stubbornness. "Coleman," he said, not turning, "walk it with me." We moved the length of the deck planks together, checking sandbags, feeling the give in the old timber. Doyle stopped by the eastern girder and pointed to a smear of black along the rivets. "You saved this span last night. They were seconds from knocking it out." His voice was flat, but there was weight under it. "I should have given the fire order sooner." "You gave us enough," I said. "Sometimes sooner only exists after the fact." He grunted. For Doyle, that was confession and benediction in one sound. The radio coughed again. Preacher waved us over. "Command wants a sit rep on boat traffic. They're asking if we can push a patrol upriver. Half a click, eyes only." Rodriguez swore under his breath. "Half a click into reeds that already tried to kill us." Doyle looked at me. "You and Rodriguez, quiet shoes, in and out. If you see anything that smells like a mortar tube or a staging area, mark it. No heroics." We slid off the bridge and into the cattails, water sucking at our boots. The river's edge was a skin of slick mud and crushed shells. The sun tried to burn through, but the mist fought back, turning the world into a blur of gray and green. We moved slow, breath through the nose. Safety off. 15 minutes in, Rodriguez stopped and touched 2 fingers to the ground. A track, shallow but clean, heel, toe, the faint grid of a boot sole. Not ours. A path snaked from the mud up into the scrub. We followed it to a pocket of trampled reeds. The smell hit first, oil, powder, wet rope. Then we saw the cache. Canvas rolls, 2 satchel charges, a coil of wire, and a mortar round waiting for a tube that wasn't there. "They staged here," Rodriguez whispered. "Packed," phase when the shooting started. I took the wire spool in a satchel and stuffed them under my blouse, then snapped a quick sketch into memory. Angle of the bank, the bent palm, the termite-gnawed log like a crooked finger. We backed out the way we came, careful to step in our own prints. Halfway to the bridge we heard voices. Low, careful. A pair of shapes slid along the reed line, rifles held high, water to their waists. They hadn't seen us yet. Rodriguez's breath hitched. My finger found the trigger. I could taste metal on my tongue. A dragonfly landed on the closest man's barrel. He froze, then flicked it away and moved on. When their backs turned, I breathed again. We let them pass. The mission wasn't body count, it was keeping that span alive. Back on the deck, we dumped the enemy wire and charged at Doyle's feet. He raised an eyebrow. "You boys go shopping?" "They had a picnic spot upriver," I said. "Looks like they'll try another trick if the fog gives them nerve." He nodded once. Then we set a better one. We spent the next hour lacing the bridge with our own insurance. Pre-placed smoke, spare belts tucked where hands would find them in the dark, trip flares hidden at the abutments. Doyle had Rodriguez tie a guide rope from the Browning to the girder. If visibility went to nothing again, the gunner could orient by touch and keep the river's center line stitched. The sun rose higher and the fog thinned to gauze. For a heartbeat I thought we might have bought quiet. Then the radio popped in with a new order that made every man stiffen. "Fox 2, be advised. Friendly convoy is falling back along the east approach. Mixed personnel, wounded aboard. Your task is unchanged. Hold the span. If enemy armor reaches the far bank, you are authorized to deny crossing." Deny crossing is the language the book uses when it means blow the bridge. Doyle looked at the satchel charge we'd captured, then at our own demolition packets stacked near the pier cap. He didn't have to say it. If the worst came, we'd trade wood and steel for lives, maybe for our own. He dragged a knuckle along the deck and stood. "We're not giving this river a feast, not on our shift." Rodriguez gave me a sidelong look. "You believe him? I believe us," I said. "If you're still with me. If these minutes feel as real in your ears as they did under our boots, tap subscribe and leave your mark. Stories like this don't survive on silence." The wind shifted then, pushing the smell of cordite away and replacing it with something colder. Upstream, a flock of black birds lifted all at once like a curtain being yanked. Price sat up straight. Preacher raised the handset, and the river, patient all morning, took its next deep breath. The first warning was the current itself. It thickened, pressed harder against the pilings, little whirlpools tugging at the trash caught on the brace timbers. A branch knocked the girder with a hollow clunk, then spun away like a thrown spear. The surface looked bruised. Rodriguez frowned. "You see that river's rising. Storm upstream?" Price asked. His voice tried to sound casual and missed. Preacher handed Doyle the handset. "Command confirms. Engineers report a release at the dam upriver. They're trying to flood out the enemy crossings. Side effect is we're about to get the worst water of the season." Doyle's eyes tightened. Flood the river to save the road. It made sense on a map. On a bridge, it felt like standing in the middle of a gun you couldn't unload. "Double the lashings on the sandbags," he said. "Get our demolition packets staged but not primed. Coleman, take the Browning down a hair and brace her tripod with that guide rope. If the deck bucks, I don't want our teeth scattered across the county." We moved like we had more hands than we did. Ropes bit into wet palms. Knots cinched. The deck began to creak, old timbers complaining as the river shouldered them. The water level ticked up board by board, a slow-motion threat. Then came the engine noise. Faint at first, throaty, mechanical, not ours. Rodriguez cursed. Armor. Through the thinning fog, a squat shape nudged the far road. A light armored car, low and mean, with a pintle gun swiveling snake-like. Infantry trotted behind it, heads down, a line of dark ants threading toward the span. "Positions," Doyle snapped. "Price low on the right. Rodriguez, you're my left eye. Preacher, call Guardian and tell them the flood trick turned the game. Coleman, on it." I settled in behind the Browning, cheek tight to the stock, hands already slick. I found the guide rope with my left thumb. Anchor, center line. Breathe. The armored car paused at the abutment like a dog sniffing a fence, then eased its nose onto the deck. The river thumped the pilings in a steady drumbeat. The Browning felt as if it hummed along with it. "Wait," Doyle said. "Let them commit." They crept forward. 20 feet, 30. The deck groaned. "Now," he said, and we tore the quiet apart. The Browning spat a belt's worth of fury, sparks jumping from the armored nose, tracers buzzing like angry bees along the vision slit. Rodriguez's Garand smacked fast and disciplined, picking off the infantry in the wake. Price, steady, and worked his rifle in a tight rhythm that would have made any instructor nod. The pintle gun barked back and chewed a chunk from our sandbags. The deck lurched as a wave smacked the pier cap. For a second, the world tipped left and the Browning's legs skittered. My thumb found the rope, felt center, dragged the muzzle back to the slit. The next burst punched the pintle gunner off his mount, a rag doll dropping out of sight. "Preacher!" Doyle yelled. "Tell Guardian the party's at our front door." Preacher's voice rose over the rattle. "Guardian, Fox 2. Enemy light armor on deck. Flood conditions. We are engaged at close quarters. We need smoke and a gun run if you have it." The armored car didn't like our welcome. It reversed, clanking, rear tires squealing on wet timber. I tracked the slit and let the Browning talk again. A puff of black from the engine bay said the bullets were finally eating something that mattered. The vehicle jackknifed, rear end wobbling. The driver overcorrected and his front tire slid off the edge. The car hung there half on, half off, belly grinding the curb, tires spinning above the river's gnashing teeth. The infantry wavered. Then a sergeant on their side did what sergeants do, shoved them forward with his voice. They came on in a broken line, firing from the hip. Rounds zipped past our cheeks with the wasp sound that makes your molars ache. Price took a hit to his sandbag wall and went down with a curse, hand to his ear. Not blood, just stung by flying grit. He blinked, grinned a shaky grin, and got back up. "Still pretty," he said to nobody. "Coleman," Doyle called. Short burst, right edge. "Keep them off the girder." I tapped the trigger and let 3-round strings stitch the air. Men dropped, stumbled, clung to the railing. The river reached hungrily for anyone who leaned too far. Preacher waved the handset. "Guardian copies, smoke inbound from the west, 30 seconds. Air's tied up, but they're pushing a mortar team onto our side to give us cover." Smoke popped on the wind like eggs frying. Gray curtains unfurled across the approach road, blinding the armored car and painting the infantry into silhouettes. Rodriguez worked those silhouettes one by one, like a man pulling nails from an old board. Doyle slid to my shoulder and spoke without looking at me. "Whatever else I ever said, you belong on this gun." I didn't answer. I just kept the rope under my thumb and the river's center line framed. The armored car groaned, tipped and finally surrendered to gravity. It fell slow and heavy and stupid like a cow rolling off a truck. The splash swallowed its scream. The water surged higher. "Resupply is 10 out," Preacher said. "Guardian says hold at all cost." Doyle laughed once, sharp and humorless. They always did love that phrase. The river punched the pilings again. We braced for the next round. If these moments keep you here, if the breath in your chest synced with this bridge for even a minute, drop a comment. It matters more than you think. By mid-afternoon, the sky went the color of gunmetal and stayed there. The flood turned the river into a muscled thing, shoulders heaving, breath ragged. Debris battered the span, branches, a section of fence, once the roof of a shack that rode the current like a broken ship until the girders ripped it in half. We'd burned through more belts than I wanted to count. Price's jitter had hardened into a calm that looked borrowed from someone older. Rodriguez kept a quiet tally of targets under his breath, a rosary of names only he could see. Preacher split time between the handset and a carbine, sending clipped updates that sounded like the last lines in a ledger. The enemy didn't quit. They adjusted. No more armored nose pushes, no neat boat lines. They hugged the upstream abutment where the current tried to suck them under and used it as a blind, popping out in pairs and threes to test our edges. We bled them each time, but the cost was attention. Every minute we spent focused, there was a minute we weren't watching the far tree line. That's where they hid the real knife. Rodriguez saw it first. Downriver, low, fast. A raft, improvised, lashed from oil drums and planks, shot toward the downstream pier cap. 2 men crouched low, a long, dark bundle between them. The bundle looked like a log until the wind shifted and peeled the tarp back. Wire, a charge big enough to peel the bridge like a tin can. "Right channel," Doyle barked. Coleman, break it before it plants. The Browning hammered. The raft skipped, slewed, caught a cross-current, and slammed into the pier with a thud I felt in my feet. One man tumbled into the water and vanished. The other clawed at the bundle, trying to wedge it in place. I walked the bursts into him. He folded over the drum and slid away. The bundle didn't. It hugged the stone like a stubborn barnacle. "Rodriguez," Doyle said, voice flat. "You with me." They clipped on ropes to the railing. My stomach clenched. The river was a throat, and those ropes were slim tongues asking to be bitten off. "Sir," I said, not hiding the edge. "I'll go." Doyle shook his head once. "You're the weight on the hinge. I need that gun talking." He vaulted the rail with Rodriguez behind him. The current grabbed their legs and shoved. They moved like men crossing a bar fight, fast, low, trusting their feet more than their eyes. The rope snapped tight, sang, loosened, sang again. I gave them what I could. Suppression, anything that lifted a rifle along the bank. Got a taste of the Browning. Price and Preacher kept the air mean with Garand cracks. The river tried to shout louder than all of us. Doyle reached the bundle and jammed his body between it and the pier, boots scrabbling for purchase on slime. Rodriguez wrestled with the wire, fingers fumbling for the knot. I could see the muscles in his forearms bunching even at that distance. Then a round found Rodriguez's shoulder. He spun, rope jerked, boots skated. He didn't scream. He just went boneless for a second, and the river took that second as permission. Doyle grabbed him by the webbing and slammed him back against stone, face contorted, teeth bared. He shouted something I couldn't hear. Rodriguez nodded. His free hand kept working the knot, the other hand pressed against his own blood. I don't remember deciding to move. One moment I was behind the Browning. The next my boots were on wet rail and the rope was around my waist. Price said my name like a warning. I jumped anyway. The water hit like a tackle from the blind side. It wasn't cold. It was angry. I went under, swallowed a mouth of it, came up coughing with the rope burning my hip. The pier loomed. Doyle's eyes flashed. He shoved Rodriguez into my reach, then slammed his palm into my chest hard enough to bruise, a command written in bone. "Take him. Finish it." I hooked my arm through Rodriguez's harness and planted my boots where Doyle had, back grinding the stone. With my free hand, I found the wire where it bit the pier. My fingers were thick as clubs. The knot felt like a snake made of wet cord and grease. I dug my nails in, tore skin, yanked until something gave. The wire slid, then peeled free like old tape. The bundle shifted. Doyle made a sound that was half curse, half prayer, and together we levered the charge off the stone. The river stole it and dragged it downstream like a thief. 10 seconds later, a dull boom rolled up the channel, and a geyser of dirty water leapt where the bend hid the worst things. "Back," Doyle grunted. We crab-walked along the pier, river punching ribs, rope humming. Price and Preacher hauled us over the rail like landing big fish. I lay on the deck and watched the clouds spin. Every breath tasted like metal and pride. Doyle sat up, face gray, and looked at me like I was someone he'd known a long time. "All right," he said. "All right." From the tree line came a new sound. Engines, many, no longer tentative. The friendly convoy. Our consequence. "Guardian says 5 minutes." Preacher panted. "They'll hit our end first." 5 minutes is either a lifetime or an instant. We made it both. If you're with us, if you want more nights told by the men who carried them, subscribe. Your voice keeps ours from sinking. The first truck nosed out of the mist like a tired animal smelling hay. Canvas flapped along its ribs. Medics rode the tailgate, faces hollow, hands already busy with men on litters who had run out of time to bleed slowly. Behind it came an ambulance. Then another truck. Then a jeep with a bent fender and a windshield crazed into spider webs. Doyle stepped into the lane and windmilled his arm. "Slow and straight. No weaving. Keep to the center planks. Do not stop on the crown." They obeyed because he sounded like there was no other way to exist. Rodriguez's bandage bloomed red and then held. Price took the Browning while I rolled a fresh belt into the feed tray and locked it down. Preacher planted himself at the midpoint with the handset bare to the rain that had finally started to fall. Fat drops thudding like thrown pebbles. The convoy kept coming. The bridge groaned but held. Every truck took a breath out of us and handed back a little faith. The flood slapped at the pilings and gnashed its teeth, angry that dinner was getting away. Then the enemy woke up to what we were doing. Fire sparked along the far bank, quick and mean. Rounds clipped canvas, smacked steel, whined past ears. A bullet took a chunk off the ambulance's mirror and spun it into the river like a coin. The driver flinched, corrected, kept rolling. "Coleman," Doyle said, "curtain, right side." I laid a wall of tracers along the tree line, not hunting heads, just shoving dirt in their face. Rodriguez matched me with the Garan's flat urgency. Price laughed again, the sound brittle and brave, and threaded his shots where mine couldn't reach. A truck stalled 3 planks shy of clear deck. Its engine coughed twice, died, refused to resurrect. The driver slapped the dash like it could shame the machine back to life. Men shouted, the line bunched. "Move it," Doyle roared. 2 soldiers jumped off the tailgate and pushed until their boots squealed. The wheels squealed back. The truck didn't. It just sulked like a mule on a slope. "Coleman," Doyle snapped without looking. "With me." We left the Browning to Price and hit the tailboard with our shoulders. The truck budged and then went heavy again, more stubborn with every inch. Someone up front forgot themselves and hit the brake. The chassis jerked like a struck bull. "Neutral," I yelled. "Neutral, damn it." The driver found the right slot and we shoved her past the crown. When the tires kissed the downslope, the truck remembered how to be a vehicle and rolled on, carried by gravity and our temper. A mortar thumped, then another. They'd reset the tubes and found the range. The next shell slapped the water just off the downstream pier and sprayed us with a rain of silt and leaf mold. The one after that landed short of the road and blew a hole in a puddle big enough to drown a dog. "Guardian!" Preacher shouted into the handset. "They're bracketing us. If you have smoke left, now is the time." Smoke popped like a string of firecrackers. Gray walls drew themselves between our deck and their anger. Behind that curtain, the convoy kept sliding past, 1 heartbeat per axle. The last ambulance hit a cracked plank, and its tire bit through. The hub sank, the chassis canted, the siren that hadn't worked all week found its voice in a single awful yelp. Inside, a medic shouted that he had a bleeder who couldn't wait. We didn't talk about it. We swarmed. Price took the jack. Rodriguez and I levered the plank with a steel bar and a prayer. Doyle crawled under the frame with a chain and a look that said he'd bargain with the river himself if it came to it. Preacher handed the handset to the medic and put his back into the lift like pushing was a way to speak with God. The wheel rose 1/2 inch. "Enough." Rodriguez shoved cribbing under the axle. We heaved again and the tire found wood. The driver goosed the throttle. The ambulance lurched free and then we were running beside it, slapping the fender like sending off a ship we'd built with our hands. Silence followed in the ambulance's wake. Not the deadly kind, the finished kind. The kind a church has when the last hymn dies and nobody reaches for the door because they're not quite ready to rejoin the world. Preacher put the handset to his ear and smiled with half his face. "Guardian says clear. Convoy's across. We're done." Doyle didn't sit. He walked to the midpoint again and put his palm flat on the deck. I joined him. The timber was hot in places, cold in others, like a fever breaking. We stood there a long breath. "You were right," he said quietly. "About sooner." "You were right," I said. "About us. We didn't blow the charges." We stacked them by the pier and covered them with a tarp and left a note in grease pencil that said only, "Use me if you must," and signed it with our call sign like a promise and a dare. They pulled us off the bridge at dusk. The flood went on without us. It always will. Years later, after the uniform hung quiet in a closet, after the hair went gray and the hands learned gentler work than jamming belts into hungry guns, I find myself on a different bridge sometimes, a pedestrian kind, with families and laughter and a river below that carries sunlight instead of wreckage. I run my palm along the rail and feel old timber in my bones. In the Veterans Hall, there's a folding chair with my name sharpied under the seat. When a kid asks about courage, I don't talk about medals. I talk about a guide rope under a thumb, a gun that had to keep talking, a sergeant who learned a man by what he did when the water rose. I talk about Price's laugh finding steel, Rodriguez's fingers finding knots in the river's mouth, Preacher's voice turning orders into oxygen. I talk about how a bridge is just wood and iron until men decide it means the ones behind them get to live. If this story stayed with you, if you felt that deck creak and that river breathe, subscribe, leave a comment, and share it. Your voice keeps ours from being washed clean away. I'm Isaiah Coleman. That was the night the river ran red. Thank you for listening.